It was quiet, too quiet for a Tuesday afternoon. The kind of quiet where you can hear your own breathing. The kind of quiet that lets you feel the weight of time slipping through your fingers. The blinds in the hospital room were half open, letting in slivers of golden sunlight that painted the walls in stripes. Outside, life kept going. Cars moved in the distance. People walked past the hospital entrance. But inside, in that small room on the third floor, everything slowed to a crawl. James sat in the chair next to the bed, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, fingers laced together so tightly his knuckles were white. He was 32 years old, but at that moment he felt like a child again. Like he was 5 years old, sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for his dad to tell him how to fix something he'd broken. Except this time, there was no broken toy. There was a broken man. His father, Thomas Miller, lay there, frail in a way James had never seen before. This was the same man who used to carry him on his shoulders without breaking a sweat. The same man who built a treehouse in the backyard with nothing but a hammer, some old wood, and an afternoon of determination. The same man whose laugh used to fill an entire room. Now his frame was thinner, his voice softer, his breath slower. There was an oxygen machine in the corner, humming steadily. The smell of antiseptic lingered in the air, and every now and then, the faint beep of a heart monitor reminded James how fragile this moment really was. For weeks, doctors had been honest, maybe too honest. It could be days, they said, and James had been sitting here for most of those days, waiting for the words he didn't want to hear, but also for the ones he knew he needed. Thomas opened his eyes and smiled faintly when he saw his son. It wasn't the wide, booming smile from years ago, but it was enough. "Hey, kid," he said, his voice rough but warm. James tried to smile back. "Hey, Dad." For a while, they didn't say much, just sat there. Sometimes words get in the way. Finally, Thomas motioned with his hand for James to come closer. James leaned in, resting one knee on the floor so he could hear him without straining. "I don't have much time," Thomas said, "so I'm not going to waste your ears on stories you already know. But before I go, I need you to hear me, really hear me." James swallowed hard. His throat felt tight. "I'm listening." His father took a slow, deep breath, like he was gathering the last reserves of his strength just to form the words. "You think the world's going to give you the answers. You think, if you just keep going long enough, somehow it'll all make sense. But it doesn't. Not on its own. Life won't hand you meaning, son, you have to make it. Every single day." He paused, his eyes narrowing as if to make sure James wasn't missing a single syllable. "I want to leave you with 3 things," Thomas continued, his voice trembling but deliberate. "If you remember nothing else from me, remember these." James leaned in even closer, the sound of the oxygen machine fading in his mind. "First, how you treat people will always matter more than how much you impress them. I've seen men spend their lives trying to be admired, only to be forgotten the moment they're gone. But kindness, real kindness, that lives longer than you do." James felt something inside his chest tighten. His father had always been the kind of man who waved at strangers, who remembered people's names, who tipped waitresses extra if they looked tired. And now, hearing it as a lesson, it made even more sense. "Second," Thomas said, his breath hitching, "never be afraid of hard work. It won't kill you, but laziness will slowly rob you of your dignity. Work gives you something to stand on when the storms come." James thought of the countless times he'd seen his dad come home with dirt on his hands, boots worn through at the heel, but still smiling because he'd earned his dinner. Thomas's eyes softened, but his voice stayed steady for the last one. "And third, never let the world choose your path for you. They'll try. Oh, they'll try. But the only life worth living is the one you choose, not the one you're pushed into. If you let fear or money or other people's opinions decide for you, you'll wake up one day wondering who you are." There was a long silence. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, his hand resting weakly on James' arm. "You've got my blood in you," he whispered. "That means you've got more strength than you think. When I'm gone, I need you to live like you know that's true." James' throat burned. He wanted to say something, anything, but all he could manage was a quiet, "I will, Dad, I promise." His father's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Good, then I can rest easy." For a few moments, neither of them spoke. They just sat there, holding onto each other's presence as if that alone could stop time. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting a warm, amber glow across the room. James didn't know it yet, but this conversation, these few minutes in a small hospital room, would echo in his mind for the rest of his life. It would shape every choice, every risk, every moment he had left. Because sometimes, the most important things you'll ever learn are whispered in the quiet, between one heartbeat and the next. Before the hospital room, before the tubes and monitors, before James was even old enough to understand the concept of time running out, there had been a life, a full, messy, beautiful life, that belonged to him and his father. It was built out of small moments, the kind of moments you don't realize are teaching you something until years later. James' earliest memory of his father wasn't of a birthday or a big trip. It was a Tuesday morning in late spring. He must have been 4 or 5. The kitchen smelled like coffee and toast, sunlight spilling across the checkered tablecloth. His dad was kneeling by the door, tying James' little sneakers. "You always double knot," Thomas had said, looping the laces with the precision of a craftsman. "It's not just so they don't come undone. It's so you know you did it right the first time." At the time, James thought it was just about shoes. Years later, he'd realize his father was teaching him something bigger. Do things with care. Do them in a way you won't have to fix twice. When James was 8, he wanted a treehouse. The kind his friends had, with ladders and trapdoors and a view high enough to make you feel like the king of the neighborhood. Money was tight back then. They couldn't buy the fancy pre-made kits. But that didn't stop Thomas. One Saturday morning, James woke up to find a pile of old wooden boards in the backyard and his dad holding a hammer. "Where'd you get this stuff?" James had asked, wide-eyed. "Some folks throw away more than they realize is worth keeping," his dad replied, winking. For 2 weekends straight, they built that treehouse together. His dad let him hold nails, steady the boards, and even hammer a few in, though Thomas always finished them to make sure they were safe. By Sunday evening of the second week, the treehouse stood proudly between the branches of the old maple tree. It wasn't perfect. The walls weren't level and the paint was patchy, but it was theirs. Years later, James would understand the other lesson. You don't need perfect tools to build something that matters. By the time James was 12, the world had started to feel bigger and sometimes scarier. Kids at school were meaner. Homework was harder. And his parents had started arguing more quietly, but more often. It was around then that his father started taking him on early morning walks. They'd leave the house before the sun was fully up, walking the quiet streets while the rest of the neighborhood still slept. Thomas called it getting ahead of the day. Sometimes they'd talk about baseball, other times about how to fix a leaky faucet. But every once in a while, Thomas would slip in something deeper. "Most people," he said one chilly morning, their breath hanging in the air, "wait for life to get easier before they start living it. But it doesn't work that way. You start living now. You take the hard with the good. Otherwise, you'll spend your whole life waiting." Those walks stuck with James. Even as a teenager, when waking up early was the last thing he wanted to do, part of him missed those quiet moments when the world felt simple and his father's words carried more weight than any textbook. Then came the summer James turned 16. That was the year his dad taught him to drive, and the year they had their first real fight. James had gotten a job at the local grocery store, bagging groceries and pushing carts. One Saturday, he decided he didn't feel like going in. He figured calling out wasn't a big deal. But when Thomas found out, he didn't yell. He didn't slam doors. He just handed James the car keys. "Drive," he said. Confused, James got in the driver's seat. His father directed him to a construction site on the edge of town. They parked and Thomas pointed at the workers, some sweating in the sun, some bent over heavy equipment. "You see them?" he asked. James nodded. "They showed up today. Some of them are tired. Some of them are sick. But they're here because their word means something. And that's the difference between being trusted and being replaceable." James sat in silence, the point sinking in deeper than any lecture could. He never called out of work without a good reason again. As the years passed, the lessons kept coming. Sometimes wrapped in humor, sometimes in frustration, but always rooted in love. When James went off to college, his father didn't give him a long, dramatic goodbye. He just hugged him tightly and whispered, "Remember who you are, even when nobody's watching." When James failed his first big exam, his father didn't offer pity. He sent a short text, "One failure doesn't end a story unless you let it." When James landed his first real job, Thomas didn't talk about salary or titles. He asked, "Does it make you proud to tell people you do it?" They didn't have the perfect father-son relationship. There were disagreements about money, about politics, about whether you should salt pasta water before or after it boils. There were years when they didn't talk as often as they should have. But underneath it all, there was respect. A quiet, unshakable respect. And then things changed. Started small. A cough that wouldn't go away. A little more fatigue than usual. Thomas brushed it off at first, insisting it was just age catching up. But soon, doctor visits turned into tests. Tests turned into results. Results turned into the kind of words that sit heavy in your stomach. Cancer. Advanced. James remembered the day his father told him. They were sitting on the back porch, the old boards creaking beneath their chairs. Thomas didn't sugarcoat it. He said the word. Then he took a sip of coffee and said, "Looks like we've got less time than we thought, so let's not waste it." And they didn't. Over the next 2 years, they built a different kind of treehouse. Not out of wood and nails, but out of conversations, shared meals, quiet drives, and small adventures. They went fishing at the lake they hadn't visited since James was a teenager. They drove 3 hours to eat at a diner Thomas had read about in a magazine. They stayed up late one night watching the stars, arguing about which constellations were which. Every moment became sharper, more vivid, because they both knew, even if they didn't say it, that each one could be the last. And now here James was, back in the hospital, sitting next to the man who had taught him how to tie his shoes, build a treehouse, show up for work, and live with integrity. The life they had shared wasn't perfect, but it was enough. More than enough. It was a blueprint, one James would carry into the rest of his life. Because his father hadn't just raised a son. He'd raised a man who understood that the measure of a life isn't in the years, but in the way you fill them. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Outside, snow drifted lazily past the window, the kind of slow, deliberate snowfall that makes the whole world feel hushed. James sat beside his father's bed, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped. He'd been there for hours, though time felt strange now. Some minutes dragged like days, others vanished in a blink. His father's breathing was shallow, but his eyes were still sharp. Those deep hazel eyes that had watched James grow from a clumsy kid into the man sitting here now. "Son," Thomas began, his voice raspy but steady. "I need you to listen close." James leaned in. Not the kind of listening where you're just waiting for your turn to talk. The kind where you let it sink into your bones. James nodded, swallowing hard. His father took a slow breath. "You've heard me talk your whole life, but this is the one conversation I don't want you to forget." James could feel the weight in those words, the finality, the urgency. He tried to steady his own breath. "First thing," Thomas said, "stop waiting for the right moment. You'll wait your whole life. You'll think, 'I'll take that trip when I have more money. I'll say how I feel when it's the right time.' Son, the right time is a lie we tell ourselves so we can stay comfortable. You take the moment you have, even if it's messy, even if you're scared, and you make it right by showing up." James felt that, really felt it. How many moments had he already let slip by? "Second thing," his father continued, "don't measure your life in years, money, or trophies. Measure it in the number of times you made someone else's load a little lighter. That's the real scoreboard. Doesn't matter if it's a stranger or your best friend. The way you leave people feeling, that's what sticks long after you're gone." He paused to catch his breath, his hand shifting weakly on the blanket. James reached over and held it. Third, listen more than you talk. People will tell you who they are if you give them the space. And when you speak, make it count. Don't waste words on tearing someone down. The world's already too good at that. Use them to build something, even if it's just making someone smile. James' throat was tight now. He wanted to say something, anything, but he didn't dare interrupt. Fourth, take care of your integrity like it's the last dime in your pocket. Once it's gone, it's hard to earn back. Your name is worth more than any paycheck, title, or applause. Protect it. Thomas's voice cracked slightly on the next words. Son, I've watched men sell pieces of themselves for comfort. Don't be one of them. A tear rolled down James' cheek. His father noticed, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You've got my eyes, you know, but I hope you use them better than I did. See people, James. Really see them. Not just what's on the surface, but the fears they're carrying, the dreams they've buried. Everyone's fighting a battle you can't see. Treat them like that's true. James felt his father's grip weaken slightly. It scared him. But then Thomas squeezed again as if to say, I'm still here. Fifth, don't be afraid to fail loud. Too many people fail quietly because they never try. I'd rather see you fall flat on your face in front of the whole world than sit safely in the stands your whole life. The stands don't change you. The field does. There was a long pause. Thomas's breathing slowed, and for a moment, James thought maybe that was all. But then his father's voice came again. Softer now, but somehow even stronger. And finally, love hard. Not the easy kind you see in movies. The kind that sticks when it's inconvenient. The kind that forgives even when your pride wants to slam the door. The kind that shows up when it's raining, when it's cold, when there's nothing in it for you. Love is the only thing that'll still matter when you're lying where I am now. James was crying openly now. He didn't care. Thomas reached up, slow and shaky, and placed his hand on the side of his son's face. You're my proudest thing, James. Not the house, not the car, not the job I had. You're the story I'm leaving behind. So make it one worth telling. James pressed his hand over his father's, memorizing the weight, the warmth, the shape of it, because he knew one day soon this hand would be gone. The monitor beeped softly in the background, a metronome counting the beats of a life well lived. And then, with a breath that felt heavier than all the others, Thomas said the last words he would ever speak to his son. Leave so fully that when your time comes, you have nothing left to say. James stayed in that room long after his father's eyes closed for the final time. The snow outside had stopped. The world felt unbearably quiet. But inside, something had shifted. He didn't feel hollow. Not completely. He felt charged. Like his father had handed him a torch, and it was now his job to carry it. In the weeks that followed, James didn't make any grand declarations. He didn't post a long tribute online. He just started showing up differently. He took that trip he'd been putting off. He called people instead of texting. He listened longer than he spoke. He paid attention not just to what people said, but to what they meant. And every time fear whispered, "Wait until the right time," James remembered his father's voice. The right time is now. Years later, when James had children of his own, he found himself passing those lessons down. Sometimes word for word, sometimes wrapped in his own stories. Because that's what his father had really given him that day in the hospital. Not just advice, but a way to live. A compass that always pointed toward the kind of man he wanted to be. And if you're listening to this now, maybe you've been waiting for the right moment too. To chase that dream. To say, I'm sorry. To say, I love you. Consider this your moment. Not next week. Not someday. Now. Because one day you'll have your own last conversation. And you'll want to know, deep in your bones, that you lived so fully. There's nothing left to say. I want you to pause for a moment. Not just hear me, but really hear me. Because you and I, we're not that different from James. We've all got people in our lives, maybe a parent, maybe a mentor, maybe a friend, who, if we're lucky, have given us words that could change everything. If we let them. But here's the truth most of us avoid. We live like time is some endless bank account. We tell ourselves there will always be more days, more chances, more conversations, until one day there aren't. And the words we wish we'd heard, or the words we wish we'd said, they just hang there unfinished. That's why James' story matters. Not because his father's words were magic, not because they were wrapped in some grand, dramatic speech, but because James listened. He didn't tuck them away in a notebook he'd forget about. He didn't say, "Yeah, I'll get to that later." He carried them into every room he walked into from that day forward. And that's where you come in, because this isn't just about James. It's about you. Think about the last time you told yourself, "I'll do it when the timing's better." Was it asking for that raise? Starting that business? Calling someone you've been meaning to call? Or maybe it was something smaller. Telling your kid you're proud of them, even though they messed up. You know what the real cost of waiting is? It's not the missed opportunity. It's the slow erosion of the life you could have been living all along. Thomas's first lesson, stop waiting for the right moment, isn't just nice advice. It's a dare. A dare to start before you're ready. A dare to make the call, book the ticket, write the first chapter, even when your knees are shaking. You don't need to feel ready. You need to act. And that second lesson, measure your life by the times you've lightened someone else's load. That one might be the most dangerous of all. Dangerous because it's so simple we underestimate it. You want to know the fastest way to get out of your own head? Help somebody else. It doesn't have to be a grand gesture. Sometimes it's as small as holding the door, or listening without rushing to tell your own story. Or telling someone, "I see you, and I'm glad you're here." You think the world's too broken to fix? Then start fixing the 2 feet of ground you're standing on. That's how movements are born. The third lesson, listen more than you talk, is the one that will change every relationship you have. Because the truth, most of us aren't really listening. We're waiting for our turn to speak. But the moment you give someone the space to really be heard, you stop being just another face in the crowd. You become someone they'll never forget. The fourth, protect your integrity, isn't flashy. It won't get you trending on social media, but it's the thing people will remember about you when you're gone. Your name is your legacy. Don't trade it for comfort. Don't sell it for convenience. The fifth, fail loud. That's the one most people will run from, because failure is embarrassing. It's vulnerable. It's public. But here's the secret. The only people who never fail are the ones who never try. And they're the ones who will look back with more regret than you can imagine. When you fail loud, you give other people permission to try too. And that ripple effect, that's worth every scrape and bruise you'll get along the way. And the last one, love hard. That's the one that will make everything else worth it. Because at the end, when the monitors are beeping and the snow is falling outside your window, the only question that matters is, did you love? Not just when it was easy, not just when they deserved it, but when it cost you something, when you had every reason not to, and you chose to anyway. So here's my challenge to you. Before this day ends, I want you to do 3 things. 1. Act on something you've been waiting for the right moment to do. Send the message. Make the call. Start the thing. Don't wait for permission. Take the moment you have and make it count. 2. Lighten someone's load. Doesn't have to be big. A coffee, a compliment, a text that says, "I'm thinking of you." Make one person's day easier. Just one. 3. Tell someone the thing you've been meaning to say. "I love you. I'm proud of you. I'm sorry." Whatever it is, say it. Don't let it sit in your throat for another year. James didn't just hear his father's words. He lived them. And here's the thing. You don't need to wait until someone is in a hospital bed to have this kind of conversation. You can start living like that now. Imagine what your life would look like a year from now if you started today. If you stopped waiting. If you made kindness your scoreboard. If you listened more than you talked. If you protected your integrity like it was gold. If you failed loud and loved harder than you ever thought you could. That's not just a good life. That's a life worth remembering. So if you've been looking for a sign, this is it. The clock is ticking whether you admit it or not. And one day, it'll be you lying in that bed, looking into the eyes of someone you love, wondering if you lived the way you should have. Don't leave them with, "I wish I had." Leave them with, "I'm glad I did." If this story stirred something in you, if it made you think about the people you love, the moments you've been putting off, the life you still have the power to live, I want you to do two things. First, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Don't assume they've already heard it from you. You never know what today might mean for them. Second, subscribe, because every day, I'll bring you more stories that aren't just meant to be heard. They're meant to be lived, because the words we carry matter. And today, you've been given some worth carrying for the rest of your life.